Hi, everyone. It's the Plant-Based Business Hour. I'm Elysabeth Alfano. Great to have you with me today. It's been a crazy fall after a very crazy summer, so I feel like the recording schedule has been a little off, but I am really happy to be with you here today. Not on my regular Tuesday, but still nonetheless. So great to bring you a really groundbreaking interview that I had a while back with Dan Buettner, who is the founder of the Blue Zones. Maybe you've had some of his books, you've read them, including Blue Zones Kitchen, which is what we talked about in a long form interview, all those great recipes from those folks around the world who are living to 100 and way beyond. Way beyond. It's not even 100 and 101. There are examples of 118, 120, and long into the 100 and teens. So Dan, being a National Geographic explorer and researcher, went around the world and looked at those diets and what those people were doing in those diets and those lifestyles. Because not only do they have the big number, but in living to 100, they are healthier longer. So it's not just that they have longer lives, but they have healthier, longer lives. So I'm going to get into a critical snippet of that interview in just a moment. And of course, if you want the full, I think it's almost an hour and a half interview, then you can always go find it on iTunes and Spotify, the Plant-Based Business Hour. And it is my interview with Dan Buettner, who is now the host of Netflix hot show Live to 100, The Secrets of the Blue Zone. But he has written many, many books and is the founder of the Blue Zones organization, which does so much research and really just a critical figure. So I was over the moon to be spending the afternoon with Dan Buettner for this interview. Until we get to that, just give me a little moment here to tell you what I've been up to and why this interview is happening on a Wednesday and not a Tuesday is because I've been in Colorado speaking and participating in the ESG for Impact Financial Conference. And I want to tell you what a difference a year makes. Now, you might remember that on this podcast, I'd been talking about the success of food service since mid 2022 when everybody was talking about IRI data and that the sales in the grocery store, particularly in the fresh section, not necessarily the frozen section, which was kind of holding its own, but the IRI data from the fresh section of the grocery store was down for things like plant-based burgers. And so everyone was saying, fueled by some Bloomberg poor reporting, in my opinion, that the sector was over. And I kept saying, well, there's this enormous food sector number, food sector being hospitals, universities, corporate cafeterias, that they're up 40%, 2022 over 2021, and year to date, 2023 over 2022, food service numbers from distributor.foods is up 20%. So that's 20% on top of the 40%. And on this show, we've talked about why that would be. If you are a corporation trying to meet your sustainability goals by 2030 and haven't done anything yet, well, taking your cafeteria plant-based, even 2/3 plant-based, is going to give you great sustainability numbers, because if you're not producing the emissions from animals on your sustainability numbers, then you're going to immediately start lowering your carbon footprint. And at least you can put on paper that you are working towards your 2030 goals at no capex cost to you, with an immediate implementation. That's attractive. So you see food service, Aramark, Sodexo, doubling their plant-based offerings to places like corporate cafeterias, hospitals, military bases, jails, schools, universities, etc. So anyway, so the point is to say that on this podcast, we often break news before it happens. I'd been talking long about food service for a while. And now I can talk to you about the financial sector, which is often overlooked. There's been a lot of focus on the startup sector of private companies, but what's happening in the public markets? Now, last year I was at the ESG for Impact conference. Food, not really a part of that conversation. And when I would bring it up, as I often do, it was also not really something people wanted to talk about with me. Now, this year, fast forward 1 year, in a tricky economy, mind you, with a barrage of negative press, still perhaps on the heels of the plant-based business sector, but not on the plant-based environmental and sustainability story, but still sort of tricky environment, if you will. There were 3 scheduled talks about food systems transformation in a 2-day conference. And that's in addition to all the side hallway conferences that were happening. I spoke on the main stage on food systems transformation and how replacing inefficient animals will not only feed more people, but it will protect forests, protect biodiversity loss, reduce pandemic risk, and feed more people. And of course, animal welfare and reduce human healthcare costs. So quite a lot of benefits for this quasi-silver bullet that is plant-based innovation. Oh, and by the way, when you have a seismic shift of something as large as the $8 trillion food system, or the automobile industry going from, let's say, horse and buggy to the car, or the landline to the cell phone, real wealth creation happens with these sorts of seismic shifts, not because a company has 3% more revenue or not, but because an entire sector shifts globally to doing something differently. And that would be the case with producing more efficient, nutritious, easily produced in a shorter amount of time, using less resources and creating less damage. That's plant-based innovation by replacing animals. That will be adopted at scale because it's just so efficient, and businesses reward efficiency. In fact, this is what business does so well. Business takes a problem, disrupts it, and solves it at scale. So everyone wanted to talk about food systems transformation. I was on the main stage talking about that. There were 2 breakout rooms, one about biodiversity loss and how we must, in the public markets, invest to protect biodiversity loss. That quickly became a conversation about alternative proteins. A huge shout out, by the way, to Glenn Hurwitz of Mighty Earth for doing wonderful work, and also Megan Waters of FAIR, really having a great breakout session there. And then I was part of another breakout session on regenerative agriculture, and how alternative proteins and regenerative agriculture are 2 sides of the same coin, and they can and often do work together as we stop monocropping, as we look for better cover crops. You're talking about bringing more legumes as farming crops, and that is better for the soil. That means we can produce protein. Legumes have so much protein. Come on, they're like the powerhouse of protein. So you can produce that protein in much better quantities and not feed them to animals. Actually, feed them to people. That means you deforest less, you use less land, you lose less water. And we're back to the entrepreneurs and the innovators. Think what an innovative mind can do with more land and more water. So very hopeful discussions we had there about how food systems transformation, alternative proteins, regenerative agriculture working together. And that was another breakout room, in addition to all the people who stopped me in the hallway to say, I get it now. I'm interested now. I want to invest now. My clients get it. This was primarily a conference for registered investment advisors, so financial planners, people who help people invest their money. It was top of mind. So I want to share this ahead of the news cycle, like I like to do on this podcast. You may or may not have a one-off Bloomberg reporter going kind of off the deep end with not the full story. But what I see going on behind the scenes remains a really strong story of more government spending, more governments interested on food security, the public markets starting to wake up to this business opportunity, food service still great. Breaking news, I guess not so breaking now, but news that perhaps people haven't heard of yet. The state of California is requiring, this is on Governor Newsom's desk, but it's passed both houses, requiring that any business, private or public, that's over $1 billion has to disclose scopes 1, scopes 2, and scope 3 emissions. We've talked about that on the show, by the way. So you can go back to the iTunes podcast roster and you can listen to the interview with Thierry Thierry Duvanel from Bueller Group, talk about sustainability in scopes 1, 2, and 3. If you don't know what those are, basically it's up and down the supply chain. So anything in the business equation of the cost of goods sold, anywhere up and down the supply chain. Demanding scope 3, that's state of California, as they say, 5th largest economy in the world. So goes California, so goes the world. Because if you want to do business in California, you're going to have to comply. That's most likely going to impact the SEC's decision. And even if it doesn't, it impacts your decision as a business person. Because if you want to do business in California, you're going to have to disclose scopes 1, 2, and 3. And I believe it's by 2026, maybe 2027. So that is really very impactful. So you see, Industry's starting to shape up. Governments are paying attention. Food service got the memo. And I've been working on it for a long time, but I think I can say that the public markets are starting to finally see the financial opportunity and the big impact story that's here. So I bring you that bit of good news on the heels of the ESG for Impact conference. And there are so many people I want to say but I loved seeing Peter Kroll of Earth Equity. I shouldn't start this because now I'm never going to remember everyone's name. I will never be able to comment on everyone here, but Angela from Revalue, and of course, Julie Skye and Jan Bryan. I've just had so many wonderful conversations. Mark Lewis, just beautiful people. Bill from Stance, just doing great work. Just so many interested, wonderful hearts and wallets at work on food systems transformation. Okay, that was quite a long lead into now today's show. I want to bring on the longevity and diet expert, Dan Buettner. It's probably no surprise, folks, if you want to live to over 100 and healthy years, not live on drugs, because that's not living, that's dying longer. We don't want to die longer. We want to live longer. So if you want to live longer and have those years be healthier years, spoiler alert, one of the recommendations is no meat and no dairy, but you probably knew that was coming. Okay, without further ado, I now bring you Dan Buettner, founder of Blue Zones, author of so many books about Blue Zones diets, and now the host of the Netflix show Live to 100, The Secrets of the Blue Zones.
Towards a country where 50% of us are obese.
I am recording today from the gorgeous and beautiful Santa Barbara Four Seasons. We're back with Dan Buettner, founder of Blue Zones.
Yeah, we flatten off and we're headed towards a country where 50% of us are obese. And that's because what we eat. We're the capacity of the human machine. So everybody listening out there right now, if you do everything right and you have an average set of genes, you should make it into your mid-90s. And life expectancy here is more like 80. So we're leaving 13 to 14 years of life expectancy on the table that we could be getting. And those would be good years. A lot of people say, why don't I live that long? But the reality is the longer you've lived, the healthier you've been. So going towards 100, I can put that another way too. The cohort of people who die in their 60s suffer about 8 to 9 years of disability called morbidity. The cohort of people who die at 100, they only suffer about 9 months of morbidity.
So that was going to be another question I was going to ask you, because Blue Zones, the Blue Zone Kitchens, it's 100 recipes to live to 100. And originally, before talking to Dan, I was like, do I really want to live to 100? Is that your goal, Dan? You want to live to 100?
I wouldn't say it's a goal, but I probably am on a path. So right now, as I said before, the best you can expect given an average set of genes is about 92 or 93 for a male, maybe 95 for a female. But since 1840, life expectancy for humans has gone up 2 years per decade. So given that I'm middle-aged, I should have 4 more decades left. I should get 8 bonus years on top of my 92. So making it to 100, I think, is realistic.
Okay, this is the goal. You're talking like an athlete. Like you're in the range. You're shooting for it.
Yeah, I guess I am.
Okay. Yes. Okay, let's not keep people waiting. Let's talk about, first of all, the cities because when you started looking into the Blue Zones, there were already 3 established cities, I think, that were living the longest around the world and were sort of established Blue Zones. And you went ahead and found 2 more. Is that right?
Well, actually, when I started, there were no established Blue Zones. There was a paper in a Journal of Experimental Gerontology that referenced an area in Sardinia that these scientists were calling this one area a Blue Zone. Nobody knew about it. But I had the idea of taking the term and applying it. I went into the scientific literature, and I found this place, Okinawa, that had the highest concentration of women over 60 that made it to 100, and then Loma Linda, California, among the Adventists, where people are living about 7 or 8 years longer. And I basically named them as a Blue Zone and wrote a cover story for National Geographic about those 3 places. The idea was to find the common denominators that explain longevity in those 3 places. That book was a big hit. The magazine article was a big hit. So then I hired demographers to go out and look for more blue zones, and we found Costa Rica, the Nicoya Peninsula, and then finally the island of Ikaria, Greece. And all those places, people are not only living a long time, but they're staying healthy into their 90s and even hundreds in some cases. And remarkably, in Ikaria, they suffer about 1/10 the rate of dementia that we do here in the United States. So they're not only their bodies are not only healthy, but their minds stay sharp till the end, which is what we want.
Yeah, and this is a huge concern for people, as Dr. Ornish has talked about, perhaps reversing Alzheimer's. This is very new research, not well established yet, with plant-based diet. But there's more and more Alzheimer's, as I understand it, coming to us at an earlier age even, and I know it's a big concern for people. So you're saying that people are living not just physically healthy, but mentally they're staying sharp.
In blue zones. Meanwhile, in the United States, in the last 20 years or so, the rate of dementia has almost doubled. So we're, and it's just so clear that heart attacks, cardiovascular disease, many types of cancer, especially cancers of the digestive tract, diabetes, dementia, they all have a root cause in what we're eating. Ultra processed foods, meaty, sweetie, crappy food. As we eat more and more of it, we get sicker and sicker. But we don't want to acknowledge it.
And the frustrating thing here is it is totally within our control. A lot of people say, well, oh, it's genetics, or these things just happen and we don't know how. But actually, we really do, and it's all in our control, and we have the ability to reverse it.
Yes, I mean, theoretically it's in our control, but you go to, yes, for enlightened people like you and the people you have on your guests on your program. But if you're a single mother living in Iowa and you're supposed to go into the community and make the healthy choice for your family, if you haven't been educated, 97 out of 100 choices that you're confronted with are bad.
Yes.
They have convenience stores and Shopko and Burger King and Pizza Hut and Godfathers, and it's almost impossible to find healthy plant-based food, whole, that's not ultra processed too. So, if this is going to be disruptive, but if you're overweight in this country, it's probably not your fault.
Yes, I know what you're saying, that there is a social injustice component to it, that you have been marketed to such an extreme that there's no way out of it for you if you are in certain parts of the country. Would you say that this is intentional from the government?
No, it is a byproduct of over innovation. Until 1960, there weren't enough calories to feed every American. And Earl Butz, who was Nixon's Secretary of Agriculture, he's the guy who created this system that favors corn and wheat and soybeans and sugar beets, and the sort of distribution system to make those cheap and ubiquitous. And then it's marketing companies. It's American ingenuity that take those cheap inputs. They turn them into Frosted Flakes or wieners, or they feed them to animals and turn them into wieners and hamburgers, and then they spend marketing dollars and they create a huge profit. And it's not a conspiracy, but it's more like that old experiment. If you throw a frog into boiling water, it will leap out. If you throw a frog in lukewarm water and turn up the water 1 degree at a time, it'll just become complacent and die. That's what's happening to us in America. In 1980, there was a third the rate of obesity that we have right now. There was about a seventh the rate of diabetes. And that's not because people were more enlightened back then, or they had more discipline, or they had better diet plans. It's because the food environment was very different then.
Right. And exercise was different as well. I think people were moving around more.
Perhaps. I think it's mostly food.
Just straight diet. Okay, so let's talk about the diet habits of those in the blue zones countries, those that live the longest. I was surprised to find that there's some alcohol in there. So let's go over the list of stuff.
Rats.
Yeah, well, or good. You never know. And coffee was in there. I was surprised about that one as well. So of course I knew that meat wouldn't be in it, and plant and dairy wouldn't be in it. But let's talk about the list.
Yes. So the idea behind the Blue Zone Kitchen was to find an average of what people were eating for the last 100 years in all 5 blue zones. And to do that, we had to find dietary surveys that went back to the 20s.
Oh, wow.
Because if you want to know what a centenarian ate to live to be 100, you have to know what she was eating when she was a little girl and a teenager and newly married and middle age and newly retired. So you can't just ask a 100-year-old, what are you eating? Because they don't remember. So on average, people are eating 90 to 95% plant-based. And the 5 pillars of every longevity diet in the world are whole grains. This sort of shocks the anti-gluten crowd because you clearly see wheat in the Mediterranean blue zones, corn in the Latin American blue zones, and rice in the Asian blue zones. Greens of all kinds.
Sure.
The greens that we weed whack from our backyard, they're making beautiful salads and pies out of them. Tubers, potatoes, but especially sweet potatoes.
And the skins of sweet potatoes.
Yes, purple sweet potatoes in Okinawa, known as imo, which is about 60% of their dietary intake until 1970. And then nuts of every kind. And then the cornerstone of every longevity diet in the world is beans. If you're eating about a cup of beans a day, it's probably worth about 4 extra years of life expectancy.